My husband's greedy relatives grinned with absolute certainty when I marched inside the courtroom completely on my own, assuming my defeat was practically guaranteed. Nancy, my late spouse's mother, relaxed across the aisle wearing an elegant dark blazer and expensive pearls, her legal counsel standing tall right beside her in an immaculate tailored charcoal suit. Paige, my sister-in-law, lounged directly behind them with her ankles crossed and chin high, gesturing proudly to their side as if the final ruling had already been signed. I stepped forward holding just one item, a premium leather bag that Grant gifted me to celebrate my 31st year. It carried a far greater physical mass than anyone anticipated. A half-year of total isolation was locked tight inside that dark leather case. 6 months of physical transaction records, professional evaluations, legalized statements, and a specific hidden paper that absolutely nobody present in that courtroom expected me to hold. What none of those arrogant individuals realized, not Nancy, not Paige, and certainly not their premium lawyer adjusting his pricey custom silk tie, was the exact contents of that secret file and the devastating decree the magistrate was about to deliver. Welcome back to Quiet Justice Tales, the dedicated space where toxic family entitlement collides head-on with silent, meticulous retribution. This is a sanctuary where underdogs refuse to scream or plead, we simply show up exceptionally organized. If you have ever been cast aside by arrogant narcissists who severely miscalculated your strength, then every single second of this disclosure will resonate deep within your soul. Go ahead and leave your thoughts in the comment section below, and make absolutely certain you subscribe to our channel for more empowering stories of quiet victory. Let us trace this back to the absolute beginning. Grant and I purchased our modest residence during the very first year of our marriage. It was an unassuming 2-bedroom single-story home nestled on an incredibly peaceful road in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Nothing extravagant whatsoever. Just basic siding, a simple wire fence, and a beautiful flowering tree that Grant carefully planted during our first spring there. He joked that every single household required at least one living organism that was not obligated to pay monthly rent. My husband worked as a self-employed plumber, waking up without fail every morning at 5:30, wearing classic aftershave on his skin, leaving his rugged steel-toed boots sitting right by the entrance. I would routinely listen to his utility van rolling down our gravel driveway long before the morning sun broke past the horizon. As for me, I work professionally as a certified senior paralegal, having spent 7 consecutive years at Jenkins & Whitmore, which is a boutique estate administration law firm located on historic Princess and Street. My daily responsibilities involve drafting complex wills, submitting formal probate paperwork, and neatly organizing asset trust registries. I understand the intricacies of Virginia inheritance law with the exact same instinctive precision that Grant possessed when handling copper piping, by absolute intuition, by photographic memory, and through years of repetitive structural practice. We certainly were not wealthy people. We managed a standard home loan, maintained a shared savings reserve that we consistently funded every single month without exception, and held a comprehensive life insurance policy that Grant established the moment we legally wed. Crucially, we also possessed a fully executed will. We had sat down together to outline every single detail 4 years ago, right at Margaret Whitmore's personal office desk, while my supervising attorney watched us sign the document, leaving absolutely every asset to one another. It was an elegant, clean, completely transparent instrument, the exact variety of legal paperwork I help ordinary citizens formulate every single day of my professional career. Grant's biological family lived relatively close to our neighborhood. His mother, Nancy, resided roughly 25 minutes south in the town of Stafford. His sister, Paige, lived out toward Richmond, which was about a 90-minute drive to the east. Meanwhile, his uncle Dale, who was Nancy's biological brother, lived up toward Culpeper, approximately 45 minutes to our north. We typically encountered them only during major Thanksgiving gatherings, and occasionally over Easter lunch. Nancy always behaved with perfect politeness whenever she interacted with me. However, it was the specific type of artificial politeness you expect from a standard bank teller. Completely mechanical, highly transactional, and instantly vanishing the exact millisecond the required interaction concluded. Paige, on the other hand, chose to borrow substantial sums of cash from Grant on 3 separate occasions. She never bothered to return a single dollar of that money. Then, our entire world shattered on a random Tuesday afternoon in chilly September. I was sitting quietly at my office desk cross-referencing a complex trust modification when Margaret's private landline suddenly rang out. She answered the call, stared directly into my eyes, and uttered my first name with a vocal tone I had absolutely never heard from her before. Incredibly soft. Terribly guarded. As if speaking the name out loud might cause the physical world to shatter to pieces. A massive commercial vehicle had blown right through a solid red light over on Route 3 while Grant was driving out to complete a residential plumbing job in King George. The authorities on the scene informed me that his spirit had departed long before emergency medical personnel could even make it to his side. I immediately drove down to the local hospital regardless of what they said. I sat completely frozen in a rigid plastic seat within a sterile corridor that reeked intensely of chemical floor disinfectant, clutching his gold wedding band, which a compassionate nurse had carefully sealed inside a tiny paper pouch. The very foundations of my reality completely dissolved beneath me during those horrific hours. I do not mean that I suffered a physical collapse. I mean that the solid ground upon which I had built my entire existence simply ceased to exist, yet I was forced to find a way to keep putting one foot in front of the other regardless. And so, that is exactly what I did. I contacted the local funeral directors. I filed the necessary claims with our insurance provider. I systematically updated every single one of Grant's active plumbing clients, sent detailed group emails out to our mutual friends, organized the memorial timeline, selected the wooden casket, and personally chose the spiritual music. I knew with absolute certainty that if I allowed myself to stop moving for even a single second, my mind would completely cease to function. That was the desperate psychological bargain I struck with my own mind, and I executed it perfectly. Nancy arrived at my house later that identical evening. She sat down at my wooden kitchen table and wept uncontrollably. Those were completely genuine tears of sorrow. I gently comforted her by holding her hand because she had truly lost her firstborn child, and regardless of whatever deep manipulation Nancy was capable of, that raw agony was absolutely not a calculated theatrical performance. She had raised Grant completely by herself after his biological father abandoned them. The man walked completely out of their lives when Grant was only 12 years old, relocated down to Florida, and never picked up the phone again. Nancy had single-handedly guided that young boy through expensive dental braces, competitive youth baseball selections, and specialized trade school documentation utilizing nothing but a modest pharmacy supervisor's income. She loved Grant deeply. I never possessed a single doubt regarding that reality. What I came to question significantly later, however, was the exact transactional power she believed that motherly love automatically granted her over my life. The formal memorial service took place on a bright Saturday morning. Elegant white blossoms, Grant's favorite classic rock tracks playing softly, a traditional chapel he had not personally visited in several years, but where his late grandmother's initials were permanently engraved upon a small bronze plaque right beside the main sanctuary doors. I personally structured every single arrangement because managing chaos is my ultimate psychological defense mechanism. Over-responsible, highly calculated Ingrid micro-managing the absolutely unendurable by transforming deep emotional trauma into a neat, color-coded checklist. Nancy sat directly in the very front row, clutching Paige's hand with an intense grip. The moment the officiating minister formally welcomed family members to share their personal memories, Nancy stood up without a single moment of hesitation. She proceeded to speak continuously for exactly 6 minutes. I know the precise duration because my eyes were entirely locked onto the circular clock hanging on the rear wall, not out of cold calculation, but simply because my breaking mind desperately required something entirely stable to anchor my vision. She spoke extensively about navigating single motherhood, about the immense personal sacrifices she endured, about the tiny apartment they shared when he was a toddler, and working exhausting double shifts at CVS just so he could afford proper athletic footwear for his Little League games. Throughout that entire speech, she did not utter my name a single time. Not a mention of my existence, not an acknowledgement of our legal marriage, and not one reference to the 7 beautiful years we spent building a shared life together. I forced myself to believe she was simply trapped in the fog of profound shock. I told myself that immense grief frequently distorts an individual's emotional peripheral vision. The moment the memorial concluded, Paige abruptly intercepted me near the wooden entryway coat storage. Her expensive perfume hit me like a physical wave. Something intensely synthetic, floral, and deeply overbearing. "You really ought to let our mother oversee Grant's financial portfolios for the time being," she whispered with a sharp edge. "You are completely drowned in sorrow right now. Your mind isn't analyzing situations logically." I looked directly into her cold eyes. Paige had genuinely never managed to retain a single corporate job for longer than 14 consecutive months in her entire adult life. She currently owed major credit institutions significantly more capital than the average American owes on a brand new vehicle loan. "I truly appreciate your perspective," I replied with a completely level tone, "but I am fully capable of managing my own affairs." She tightened her lips instantly, adopting that precise facial expression people display when they have meticulously practiced a venomous retort but choose at the final second to hold it back. During the subsequent wake, Uncle Dale walked up to shake my hand. He gripped my fingers with unnecessary force while completely avoiding any direct eye contact with me. As I navigated the drive home alone, my mind repeatedly analyzed those 3 highly specific encounters. Nancy's targeted speech, Paige's unsolicited advice, and Dale's deceptive physical greeting. I felt a cold realization blossoming beneath the heavy layer of my sorrow. Something incredibly sharp and deeply uncomfortable, akin to a microscopic paper cut that remains entirely unnoticeable until you step under hot water to wash your hands. 2 weeks following the conclusion of the memorial, Nancy began arriving at my property unannounced on a regular basis. She claimed her sole motivation was to assist me in carefully organizing Grant's remaining physical items. Initially, I welcomed her presence. She neatly folded his casual shirts, packed away his work boots, and carefully wrapped his metal fishing equipment in old newsprint. These were highly productive activities, representing genuine physical assistance. However, it did not take long before I identified her true underlying behavioral pattern. She was absolutely not engaged in simple organizing. She was executing a covert search operation. I watched her systematically slide open the primary drawer of Grant's office desk, meticulously scan through private folders, then slide it closed only to immediately target the adjacent slot. She navigated through the metal storage cabinet in our guest bedroom on 2 separate occasions. I observed her movements silently from the dark hallway while she eagerly pulled through an assortment of historical tax documents like a desperate individual searching for a missing cash receipt at the very bottom of a cluttered handbag. "Are you searching for something highly specific?" I asked calmly from the shadows. She did not show even a flicker of panic. "Just hunting for old memories, sweetheart." Her vocal delivery was incredibly gentle. Her eyes, however, shifted instantly to a distant corner of the room. I listened to the distinct sound of her hard heels striking the ceramic kitchen tiles as she relocated directly toward our primary living space. That highly specific audio signature, hard, rhythmic, echoing exactly like an aggressive metronome calibrated to an entirely foreign rhythm. It rapidly transformed into a sound that my brain permanently linked with Nancy's presence. It did not represent domestic comfort, it represented an aggressive declaration of territory. What I remained completely oblivious to at that point, what I would not uncover until several weeks had passed by, was what Nancy was actively executing during the hours she was not present at my residence. She was systematically placing phone calls to our entire social circle. She called Grant's elderly Aunt Judith, his former roommate from his technical college days, and the married couple residing directly next door to our property. She pathologically informed them that I had completely replaced all the entry locks to the house and was aggressively banning her from ever stepping foot inside. She assured them that I was displaying highly volatile behavior and completely isolating my deceased husband's biological relatives. Absolutely none of those statements contained a single shred of truth. I had not altered a single entry lock on the property. I had not barred a single individual from visiting. But Nancy instinctively mastered a psychological concept that I was simply too emotionally shattered to comprehend at the time. She knew that whichever individual successfully commands the initial narrative ultimately dictates the entire legal outcome, and she had begun drafting her fictional script the exact same afternoon we laid her son to rest in the earth. Exactly 30 days after the funeral took place, Dale contacted my phone, stating quite firmly that we all required a formal sit-down meeting to clear up the remaining details of Grant's property distribution. Just standard legal protocol, he assured me smoothly. Absolutely nothing to stress over. I drove my vehicle down to Nancy's house in Stafford. The three individuals were already positioned tightly around her wooden dining room table. Nancy, Paige, and Dale, sitting in a rigid row like a corporate hiring panel waiting for an unsuspecting job applicant to walk through the door. Dale casually slid a multi-page document straight across the polished wood toward my hands. It was a typed last will and testament, containing signatures, and explicitly dated a mere 2 months prior to Grant's sudden passing. I scanned the lines once, then I forced myself to read the entire document a second time. This specific will left our entire residential home and our primary shared savings accounts exclusively to Nancy. The massive life insurance settlement was to be divided equally between Paige and Dale. As for me, I was legally allocated nothing but personal belongings. That was the exact, literal terminology utilized, personal belongings. 7 years of deep marital partnership, shared sacrifice, and mutual devotion reduced to whatever random items could fit inside a basic cardboard box. Nancy folded her fingers neatly upon the table. Her vocal delivery was completely unshakable, carrying an almost loving warmth. Grant would have absolutely desired for his true biological family to secure these assets. I focused my eyes entirely on the written signature. I did not utter a gasp. I did not tremble outwardly. But every single piece of my inner being instantly went entirely freezing and completely motionless. The exact way liquid water crystallizes from the outermost perimeters inward. The cursive signature was an absolute, undeniable fraud. I had spent 7 consecutive years watching Grant sign his name on hundreds of documents. I knew his touch on financial checks, business invoices, commercial building authorizations, and our primary mortgage paperwork. His uppercase letter G possessed an incredibly unique, highly distinctive counterclockwise loop at the absolute peak of the letter. This specific G on the paper looped in a sharp clockwise motion. The ink distribution and pen pressure were completely uniform throughout the center strokes, indicating the line was meticulously copied and traced, rather than written with a natural, freehand motion. And then there was the listed execution date on the document. Grant had been working on site down in Roanoke during that exact calendar week, a full 3 hours away, excavating heavy sewer systems for a major corporate client. He was physically nowhere near our house. Would it be all right if I retained a copy of this? I asked with a flat voice. Dale nodded his head slowly. The primary original file has already been officially submitted to the local court records. Submitted? Before I had even been granted the basic courtesy of knowing the document even existed. I quietly placed the duplicated paperwork into my bag, wished them a pleasant evening, and navigated the drive back home. My fingers trembled violently against the leather steering wheel, not due to a single shred of fear, but from the highly specific, cold, calculated fury that belongs exclusively to a legal professional who manages this documentation for a living and realizes they have just been handed an absolute amateur forgery. That identical night, I sat completely awake at my kitchen table with the duplicated document laid flat beneath the piercing white overhead lighting. I retrieved a yellow legal notepad from my corporate work satchel and meticulously noted 3 primary discrepancies. First, the cursive signature was indisputably traced. The fluid pressure of the ink did not vary in the manner a genuine human hand naturally does. It was entirely too consistent across the loops, far too heavy at the concluding terminal points, and the visible contrast between graphite particles and ink fluid in the duplicated copy strongly indicated a light pencil outline existed beneath the marker. Second, the official date. I accessed Grant's personal digital calendar, which remained completely synchronized to my cellular device because I simply had not found the emotional strength to deactivate his digital existence. From September 3rd straight through September 7th, he was executing a project down in Roanoke, a full 180 miles away from our domestic kitchen table. Third, the listed legal witnesses. 2 entirely random names I had never encountered in my entire life. Grant possessed perhaps 40 individuals in his social circle whom he would classify as genuine, authentic friends. These 2 specific names were absolutely nowhere to be found among them. 3 massive procedural discrepancies. Any single one of these anomalies would cause a file to be instantly flagged for fraud at my law firm. En masse, they constituted a blazing neon warning sign. I placed a call to Margaret Whitmore's private line at exactly 9:15 p.m. She listened to my analysis without uttering a single interruption. The moment I finished speaking, she maintained complete silence for 10 consecutive seconds. That is an incredibly long duration of silence from an elite attorney who bills clients by the quarter hour. "You are fully aware of what steps must be taken next," she stated firmly. "And you also realize that I am legally barred from representing you in this matter. It presents a clear professional conflict of interest." I understood completely. I was her direct subordinate. If she stepped in to represent my interests, the opposition's legal counsel would tear our firm apart during depositions. "However, I can absolutely direct you toward the most qualified expert in the state," she inserted smoothly. She provided me with the private contact details for Dr. Ellen Sears, an elite forensic document analyst boasting 47 successful expert court appearances and an extensive publication history within the prestigious Journal of Questioned Documents. Then she articulated one final thought. "Ingrid, you formulate these exact fraud petitions every single working day. You understand the filing architecture perfectly. Initiate the proceedings." She was right. I knew the exact mechanics required. I returned to Nancy's residence exactly 3 days later. I informed her quite directly that I possessed several pressing inquiries regarding the 2 specific witnesses enumerated on the testament, their legal identities, the exact manner in which Grant allegedly met them, and the precise timeframe they were physically present to witness the signing ceremony. Nancy stood rigidly within her front entryway. She made absolutely no move to invite me inside the house. "They were very close companions of Grant's from his early childhood days," she stated coldly. "Long before your time with him." Before my time. I had been an inseparable part of Grant's existence for 10 full years, 3 years of romantic dating and 7 years of legal marriage. I was personally acquainted with every single human being who had ever attended his birthday celebrations, every professional tradesman who had ever borrowed equipment from his truck, and every single regular participant from his bi-weekly poker gatherings. These 2 specific names had absolutely never existed within any of those social ecosystems. I informed Nancy flatly that I would be launching a formal legal contest against the submitted document. She did not seem surprised in the slightest. Her verbal retort was delivered at absolute room temperature. Each individual syllable was heavily calculated. "You showed up here without a licensed attorney representing you. You have already lost this battle." That specific statement struck my face with the physical impact of an open-handed slap. Not because it caused me emotional pain, but because it instantly illuminated their entire strategy. She had already secured formal legal counsel. She had already successfully filed the fraudulent will. She had meticulously orchestrated this entire legal ambush while I was still standing in a room selecting funeral arrangements for my husband's casket. Paige suddenly materialized directly behind Nancy in the dim corridor, slouching heavily against the wall frame with her arms tightly locked across her chest. "Just accept the reality of the situation, Ingrid. Do not make this entire process any uglier than it already is." I locked eyes with both women, mother and daughter alike. A rigid, unyielding wall of opposition standing in the exact same doorway I used to cheerfully walk through while carrying homemade desserts on Thanksgiving. "I am absolutely not making anything ugly," I responded with a completely level voice. "I am simply requiring logical answers." I turned around and drove away. 25 minutes of continuous driving on Interstate 95 South, my hands locked firmly at the 10 and 2 positions on the wheel, the audio system completely silent. In that heavy silence, I allowed the brutal mathematical equations of their scheme to fully settle in my mind. She had retained an attorney. She had struck the first blow in court. She had been actively engineering this asset seizure since before the freshly turned soil on Grant's final resting place had even begun to settle, and she was entirely convinced that I would instantly crumble into submission simply because I was standing alone. The following Monday morning, I officially filed a formal will contest with the clerk of the Stafford County Circuit Court. I personally drafted and typed every single line of the legal petition during my standard 1-hour lunch break at work, utilizing the exact same procedural template I deploy for high net worth clients at the firm. The legal grounds, explicit forgery and systemic fraud, heavily substantiated by the respondent's extensive professional background in estate verification documentation. The court filing fee was exactly $275. I paid the amount instantly using my standard personal debit card. That identical week, I initiated the systematic construction of my primary evidentiary master file. I visited our banking institution and extracted 7 complete years of historical home mortgage statements, every single monthly transaction executed from our joint checking account, every single physical check carrying my personal signature, and every automated clearinghouse deduction I had personally established because Grant routinely forgot to process bills on the 15th of the month. I meticulously assembled our historical utility accounts, our active homeowners insurance policies, and our local municipal property tax documentation, all of which were legally registered exclusively in my name or under our joint names. I utilized a high-resolution camera to document Grant's authentic signature across 22 completely distinct legal records. These included historical billing invoices from his commercial plumbing firm, our primary residential purchase contracts, shared federal tax returns, and the local building authorizations he had pulled from the city for our residential bathroom remodeling projects. 6 of those specific signatures were pristine enough to serve as ideal baseline exemplars for forensic comparison. I carefully secured them inside a heavy protective envelope and dispatched them directly to Dr. Ellen Sears via certified postal delivery, alongside a high-quality duplicate of the fraudulent will. Her required professional retainer fee was exactly $3,200. I formulated that substantial check that very evening while sitting quietly at my kitchen table, the exact same wooden surface where I had first unmasked their amateur forgery just 1 week prior. By the light of day, I processed other citizens' inheritance portfolios at Jenkins and Whitmore, handling asset trusts, probate disputes, and complex beneficiary designations. By the dark of night, I engineered my own legal counter-offensive. That heavy folder rested on the front passenger seat of my vehicle every single morning. It accompanied me into my office desk drawer during working hours, returned home with me promptly at 5:30 p.m., and sat visibly on the kitchen countertop while I consumed my dinner completely alone in the quiet. It was expanding in size every single day. The psychological isolation manifested gradually at first, before accelerating all at once. Grant's paternal Aunt Judith, a woman who had warmly embraced me at every family holiday gathering for 7 consecutive years, called my phone one evening with a vocal delivery completely saturated with carefully manufactured anxiety. "Ingrid, sweetheart, is it actually true that you have altered all the entry locks on the house and are refusing to let Nancy visit her son's home?" I had absolutely not altered a single lock on the property. I articulated this to her with absolute clarity. She hesitated on the line. "Well, Nancy explicitly stated that." "Nancy is explicitly stating things that are completely fabricated," I interrupted firmly. The resulting dead silence on the other end of the line possessed a heavy, suffocating texture, as if she was actively weighing which narrative was more socially convenient to support and concluding that my absolute truth was far too disruptive to believe. Tommy, Grant's closest companion since childhood, a licensed electrician who had stood proudly as the best man at our wedding ceremony, sent a brief digital text to my device. "Hey, I am hearing some crazy rumors through the grapevine. I honestly do not know what to believe right now." I instantly replied with a clinical overview of the verified facts, keeping the message incredibly brief. He viewed the text transmission but failed to offer any form of response for 3 consecutive days. That specific moment was when I finally conceptualized the true psychological architecture of the trap Nancy had constructed around me. She had not merely submitted a fraudulent piece of legal paper to a courthouse. She had systematically manufactured an entire alternative version of social reality. One where I was cast as the unstable, cold-hearted outsider, the deeply unhinged widow executing completely irrational choices, the greedy daughter-in-law who possessed absolutely no moral right to the fruits of Grant's lifelong labor. And she had methodically planted those deceptive seeds across every single branch of his extended social circle. It was done via late-night telephone conversations, manipulative Facebook direct messages, and calculated parking lot discussions outside their local church after Sunday service. I immediately initiated a highly detailed harassment log. I noted exact dates, specific names, precisely what phrases were uttered, and by which individual. I did not require digital audio recordings. I didn't need recordings. I required an immutable paper trail, the exact variety of structured documentary evidence that remains completely bulletproof under hostile cross-examination. The heavy master folder expanded by another 1/4 of an inch. I continued to consume my evening meals completely alone every single night. Frequently it was just a bowl of microwaved soup, generic crackers, or occasionally just a cup of black coffee. I slept strictly on my isolated side of our mattress. The interior of the house was quieter than it had ever been since the day we moved in. But that heavy quiet was absolutely not equivalent to emptiness. That quiet space was the exact laboratory where I was actively constructing their legal destruction. Paige materialized on my front porch on a rainy Thursday afternoon without providing a single moment of advance warning. She was wearing dark designer sunglasses completely indoors, an aesthetic choice that signaled to me she had either been weeping or desperately desired for me to believe she had. "I am here to extract some historical family heirlooms," she stated aggressively, stepping right past my physical frame into the foyer before I could even formulate a verbal boundary. She marched directly into our primary living room and pointed a manicured finger at the large oil painting mounted directly above the brick fireplace, a beautiful nature landscape that Grant had personally purchased from a local art festival to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. That item belonged explicitly to Grandma Caldwell, she lied through her teeth. It was an absolute fabrication. I had stood right beside Grant as he handed exactly $65 in cash to a local independent artist who was selling her original watercolors straight out of the back of her minivan. "It absolutely did not," I responded flatly. She pivoted instantly and pointed toward the polished sterling flatware collection secured inside our dining room hutch. "That item is indisputably our sacred family silver. That was a personalized wedding present delivered directly from my own biological parents, Paige." She spun around on her heel, ripping the dark sunglasses completely off her face. Her eyes were visibly bloodshot, but the moisture did not stem from a place of genuine mourning. "You do not possess the right to hoard absolutely everything simply because you signed a marriage certificate with him." "I am absolutely not hoarding everything," I stated with a dangerously quiet voice. "I am retaining what is legally and rightfully mine." That was the exact moment her mouth uttered the words. The precise sequence of language that still echoes in my mind whenever the interior of this house becomes too silent and my thoughts drift back to that horrific chapter of my existence. "Blood is blood, sweetheart. You were just renting the name." She delivered that line with the venomous precision of an individual who had been preserving it in her mind for months. Meticulously practiced, highly pressurized, and aimed directly for my psychological ribcage. I stepped directly toward the front entry door, swung it fully open, and maintained a completely flat, emotionless vocal delivery. "I think it is time for you to leave my property." She exited instantly, slamming her vehicle door with enough violent force to set the next-door neighbor's guard dog into a frantic barking fit. I closed my heavy front door, pressed my entire back firmly against the wood, and shut my eyes tight. In my left hand, I was tightly clutching a fresh home mortgage receipt from that morning's mail. $1,847. I had personally authorized that payment. Identical to every single month prior. I was absolutely not renting a single piece of my existence. I hand-built it. Every single mortgage transaction, every late-night legal filing, every single morning I woke up right next to his sleeping frame and consciously chose the shared life. It was mine. It had always been mine. Dale behaved with far more stealth than the emotional women. He completely avoided direct confrontations. Instead, he systematically maneuvered through asset